Good evening. I'm Jonathan Macugay, and I'm going to be doing my informative speech. I just wanted to take a second to introduce my audience. My cousin, Kevin Wright, our friends, Daniel and Julia Grove, my mother, Mila, and my wife, Gabriella. Now, please excuse any movement in the audience. As you know, Jeff, we do have a lot of small children, so as needed, they'll be getting up to attend to them. Good evening, and thank you for coming to my informative speech. I'm Jonathan Macugay. You all know me as John. Please call me such. Now, my speech is going to be on the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, better known as NASA. So a brief overview. We're going to be going over NASA's history, how to become an astronaut, and also NASA's future projects. Now, most people know NASA from these pop culture movies such as Armageddon, where NASA goes ahead and saves the Earth, to The Martian, where a NASA astronaut gets stuck on Mars and the entire organization makes a big endeavor to rescue him. But some things that you may not know is that NASA was formed in 1958 by the Eisenhower administration as a direct response to Soviet Russia's Sputnik program. Currently, 17,219 people are employed by NASA through 10 field centers, the most famous being the Kennedy Space Center in Florida and the Johnson Space Center in Houston. Now, the current administrator, the man in charge, is a gentleman by the name of Jim Brindenstein, and he's significant as the first elected official, Republican from Oklahoma, selected to head NASA versus people that have been in the science field. Now, some of NASA's history. There were several very early projects in the program's beginnings, such as Project Mercury, which was NASA's endeavor to get the first man in space. They would fall short to the USSR's Sputnik program. Shortly after Mercury, Project Gemini was created, with the US falling behind in the Cold War in getting a man into space. Now we needed to get a man to the moon, and President John F. Kennedy made a statement that NASA would get a man to the moon by the end of the decade, the end of the 60s. That whole project was the Apollo program. Now, several significant things about the Apollo program. Apollo 1 was the first scheduled launch, and unfortunately, in January of 1967, during a launch rehearsal, a fire broke out in the cabin, resulting in a complete loss of life of some of the most senior members of the Apollo program. Apollo 8, in December of 1968, would be the first to orbit the moon, and Apollo 11 would be the first mission that would land the man on the moon. We all know that as astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, with astronaut Michael Collins piloting the capsule. All right. Some other things was Skylab, which was the U.S.'s first and only independent space station. It would only last several years and a total of 170 mission days in space before it eventually made re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. The bigger project would be the Space Shuttle program, with billions of dollars being invested into getting man to the moon. Now NASA had to find a way to make it more economical. The Space Shuttle was a result of that, and we had Space Shuttle Columbia's first launch in April of 1981. Unfortunately, of the 14 orbiters, the program would eventually lose due to disasters, including Challenger and Now, some other important projects in NASA's history are the Hubble Space Telescope, as well as the Voyager program. Now, Voyager is especially interesting because it's a deep space probe that sent two probes, Voyager 1 and 2, outside of our solar system. And at the end of my presentation, I'll have a slide showing a letter by President Jimmy Carter detailing anyone who found the Voyager probe on its origins. Okay, how to become an astronaut? Now, I'm sure everyone here has at one point in their childhood thought to be an astronaut. Who doesn't want to go to space, put on a fancy suit? So here are some things to become qualified. One, you have to have a bachelor's degree in a STEM field, namely engineering, biological science, physical science, computer science, and mathematics. You have to have at least 3 years in your respective field worth of experience. Or the alternative to that would be to have 1,000 flight hours as a commander on a jet-propelled aircraft. And that's where you see all the military members. And also the ability to pass NASA's very enduring physical test. Some other qualifications, you have to display strong leadership, teamwork, and communication skills. And you must be selected by NASA's Astronaut Review Board. A record of 18,000 plus candidates applied in 2016. Now, of that large number, only about 120 were selected to come down to the Johnson Space Center for a first round of interviews. Less than half of that were invited back for a second interview. And even less still would eventually be selected. Once you're selected to be an astronaut, it takes about 2 years of training. Some awesome future projects. I'm sure everyone's heard of the colonization attempts that SpaceX wants to make on Mars. NASA's going to be a part of that. The main part of that will be Project Orion. Orion will be a series of tests and actually, in some words, a lunar colony where astronauts will go to the moon, establish a base to set up additional training to figure out what exactly we're going to need to make that final push to Mars. Something else I found interesting is the Parker Solar Probe. Now, this probe is going to be the first to soar as close to our solar system's sun, more so than any other probe before that. So in conclusion, we've discussed NASA's history, what it takes to become an astronaut, and also their future projects. I've listed my citations.